Good afternoon and welcome to the Healing Our Brokenness podcast, where we dissect problems and solutions from being broken people living in a broken world. 2 days ago, I got a chance to talk to a young man, and we talked about some of everything. This young man is Timothy Horton, and he happens to be my son. Some of the issues that we talked about were childhood and brokenness. We discussed music. We discussed creativity, balance of authenticity. And there were many other topics. And when he talked about childhood, it took me back to going to Memphis as a kid and being able to have that consistency along with having predictability. And those two things as a kid makes one feel safe, loved, and makes it feel like everything in the world is going right, even when it's not, is what I would say. So I want you to, without further ado, listen in to the conversation between Timothy and I. And I want you to have a blessed weekend.
There was a sun. He was devoured by earth. There was a God.
Hey,
Hi, sweetheart. How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm just looking at the text you just sent me about the poems.
Right. How's your day been going so far?
Oh, it's been all right. It's pretty busy because, people are coming in and stuff. And, I've just been trying to get the place clean and everything and all that.
Okay. So you had a busy day so far?
Yeah, it's been pretty busy. So I've just been trying to make sure I'm on top of everything and just going to clean out my car and stuff afterwards. We have our meeting and stuff.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. I haven't seen your face like this since August, the end of August.
Oh, yeah, I guess you haven't seen my face since August. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it's been since the end of August. I was thinking about that earlier today. I was like, when was the last time I actually saw him? Other than seeing pictures, but I'm saying like where I'm able to talk to you like this. We have to do something more often.
Yeah, we will.
Right?
Right.
So now we're going to introduce you. Today I have on my show Timothy Horton. He is a performing artist, songwriter, and a model. And just for those of you who don't know, Timothy is my son, my 22-year-old son. And so I'm glad to have you on the show today, Timothy.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yes, you're very welcome. Long overdue, right?
Definitely long overdue.
I would say long overdue. So, Timothy, we're going to start off by asking you if you can describe some of the, I guess I would say, crazy, funny moments that you had as a kid. Anything that comes to mind?
When I think about crazy, funny moments as a kid, I probably think about playing in the field next to the house and running the bikes all the way down there and jumping off the big rock mound that was down there and rushing through there and having all the plants and stuff all over me and the prickly stuff and just being wild out there.
Look, sound like some dangerous stuff. Look, definitely stuff I didn't know about, right?
I think you saw some of it. I think it just concerned you more so than anything else.
Oh, my word. Why do you think that, in your opinion, why do you think relationships are important?
I think relationships are important because they either make you or break you. And, the people that we meet either add to our lives and they add to, what we're doing, or they either can take away from what we're doing and, our purpose and our calling and things like that.
Okay, so you're saying like either people are asset or liability, basically.
Yeah, then you have some people who are kind of like in the neutral ground, but I feel like the neutral ground is usually only if there's like mutual boundaries set up where you guys are both kind of, not going to a certain level with each other. And at that point, it's kind of take and give as to what's really going to affect you by that person. Okay, so that's what you would describe as when it's on neutral ground. Yeah. Okay. Now, what, if you could think back, what would you say would be some of the relationships that helped to mold you as a child? Just important, I guess, impactful people. I guess at the time it was probably family, Mr. Love, spending time at Grace and Glory and Sunday school and kind of having that community and some of the after school activities and programs like that where I met different. And of course, being homeschooled and everything, we spent a lot of time together, me, you, and Hannah. But outside of that, I would say it was probably a numerous amount of people at that time. Just because I was so young, I don't think I necessarily selected a few people that were influential. But there was, when I'm looking back, the people I think about is like Mr. Caldwell, the choir director, Mr. Love, and trying to think who else. People kind of like that, Okay. Yeah. And when I think about, as I'm thinking about back myself, as you mentioned, Mr. Caldwell, I'm thinking of the trips. Remember, first choir was in Lake Forest, and we would hang at the library, do our homeschool at the library, then go over to the Gordon Center for choir. Right. But it wasn't there too long, maybe a couple of years, and then it moved to Wilmette. Mm-hmm. And we had to go to Trinity Lutheran Church. And before choir would start, because at first you and Hannah had different times, so we would go to Panera Bread, get our treats along with our food, hang out in there, do school work. Right. Then we discovered the Wilmette Public Library. And then you could eat in there. They had a separate little section, remember? I do remember the walking. Yes, right. And you guys going back and forth because we had different times. And we would be hanging out in there. And of course, I was always going through coupons, trying to create more work for you guys to do, or looking in their DVD section, trying to find some independent films. Remember how I was all into those? Mm-hmm. I remember. You remember that? And then sometimes I would sit and in the beginning, the parents were able to come and listen to you guys practice. I don't know if you remember that. And, remember that? I do. Parents are able to sit in the back, and then they kind of had to stop that because I think people are making noises on their phones or something too much, and it's causing distractions. Right. So we were no longer able to sit. So we were able to sit and listen, and I would have my newspapers sprawled out, going through that, and looking for articles for you guys to do for homeschool, or either be right around the corner inside of the church. They had like a little section, choir section around the corner with the couch and the chair. And I had my, that was like my little quiet time and looking at magazines that I found, in the library. So, those were some really good times. And we would take the bus. Remember one while we were taking the train and the bus, and we would stop, and we went, the one bus that we took, there was I think it was a blind school that was around there. Remember that one route we took? And we were almost at choir. We had to go through that one way, and then we had a good distance to walk. I don't know if you remember that. I don't think I remember that part, unfortunately. No? Yeah.
But yeah, we had a lot of adventures going to choir over the years because you did it for 9 years, and then Hannah was in choir for 6 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a while.
You see what I'm saying? So that was a long time.
Yeah. That was a long time.
Mm-hmm. And you think about Mr. Caldwell and that djembe and asking you guys questions and throwing candy out for those who had the answers. And then when they didn't have the answers right, no. Yeah, remember?
No.
No. The way he said. But he had a good relationship with the kids.
I think he definitely he had a respectable relationship because he held everybody accountable to what they were supposed to do.
Right.
And he didn't go with that whole, well, this person said this and they sang this note, so I followed them. And he would have times where he would have a section stand up and be like, go, and just have each person in that section sing until he found out who wasn't singing it right. So, it wasn't like anybody could just say, oh, I tried to, you just tried to sing along. You really had to know your part, Right, because I remember he would stop and go to like 3 kids and say, sing that part, and he would go to the next group to try to figure out who was off. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like the way he gave you guys the background, the whole history on the music. He would say this was Afro-Cuban, and he would give a whole history. Remember that? Mm-hmm. This is a Swahili song, and he would give you the whole history. Yeah, and how the song came to be. I thought that was really cool. Yeah, he was definitely didactic in his teaching when it came to trying to influence some of his interest and the stories behind things to leave with us as memories, Yeah. And that makes a huge difference when it's somebody that, like, you look back over the years. Like when I think of the librarian that served as a spelling bee coach, as well as an oratory coach, and then helping out even with the academic bowl when we had to answer all those questions and we were teams competing against other teams from other schools. But I think about the impact that she had on my life and the fact that she took an interest in me, and she showed me in 4th grade how to speak properly. You know what I mean? With the gestures and having to cut speeches down, the posture, looking at the audience, knowing how to transition, all of that. I was able to, how sometimes we take things for granted, but as you get older, you start to really appreciate certain things, and I think about it. I was thinking the other day, I was like, that was 4th grade. I learned how to speak in 4th grade in front of an audience. That's a very young age. You see what I'm saying? Because I got in the oratory contest from 4th to 8th grade. And then grammar school was over. I was in high school. But then when I was about 16 or 17, I want to say it might have been around 17, I was asked at church to be an announcing clerk. So I had to stand up in front of the church, give the church announcements, and then I had a whole write-up to welcome the visitors. So I was responsible for doing that once a month. So the speaking came back into play, and it just shows how, with our stories, how God kind of weaves them out, in and out, and whatever it is that's in us, he's going to get it to come out of us, which is bringing me to the next thing that I want to discuss with you is the role that music has played from the time you were young all the way up to now, the role that music has played in your life. And, you can talk about it family-wise and just, whatever comes to mind. Well, music's kind of always been there. I got my first guitar when I was about 6, and my dad gave me that. And then, I was kind of off and on with it for a while, playing stuff at homeschool for a certain amount of time and trying to learn things. But I probably didn't really get more serious about it until I was like about 13. And I got and started trying to play at open mics and learn a few songs and sing with them. And kind of at that point, it was an outlet, as an early teenager and the stuff that was going on at the time. And I just kind of poured into it, only for later, for it to kind of become a main, a career and a passion, after getting my associates, of course, I went to Florida and I tried to see if I could really make it playing music and things like that. And that was kind of scary. The first real taste of that was me going to Florida with somebody else and visiting Matt Chase. And I was on a beach bike and I was riding around and looking for places to play at, because he said, "Oh man, just come down here, just take a break from school, and everybody comes down here, they have a good time." So I did that for a little bit, and it was what kind of led into me going into Florida later, was that I played at a few places and met some other people who brought me in and showed me some places that they played at, and I did well. I was successful for just about 4 months in Florida and came back. So it's definitely gone from being a hobby to a passion to a career very quickly, I would say.
Okay. And what sticks out to me when I think about you with music, I knew you were going to do something with music. I didn't know what God was going to have you to do, but I felt that it was going to definitely be something, because your dad and I would play our cassettes back in the day and CDs, and you would catch on to the bridge and you would have your head going at 1 and 2 years old, and you would be going to the beat and you would go, and you were just that little, you were that young, and you were able to keep on, you had the rhythm of the song going, and you would request songs. Play Awesome God. And then we're like, "Oh, Timothy, we'd heard that song I don't know how many times, but you wanted it again." And then the other song that you requested, you called it Yes, Lord, but the name of the song was Trading My Sorrows.
Yes.
I'm trading my sorrows. Remember that? I'm laying it down. Right?
I do remember.
The joy of the Lord. And then you go chorus, Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, amen. Mm-hmm. You kept saying, "Play Yes, Lord, play Yes, Lord." And we've heard that song I don't know how many times, but we would play it again because you liked it. You liked Awesome God, the Rich Mullins version. And then you liked Yes, Lord. Well, I say Yes, Lord. You see me? You like Trading Sorrows, but you requested it by asking to play Yes, Lord again. And you would, like I said, you were 1 and 2 years old, and you were interested, in hearing that, and you liked that. And then you would sing with us when we were attending Grace and Glory. You would sing with us in the choir there. You were like 4 and 5 years old. You'd be singing and then kind of doing your own thing on the side, and then back to singing with us. Sometimes when the kids are that little, it's hard to really keep, their attention and what it is they're doing. But you were totally interested in music, and like I said, it was just evident from way back then. And singing songs in the car, when you would hear Luther Vandross singing or some of the other songs on Sundays, heading back from the city, you and Hannah would be singing those songs, Mm-hmm. Can I take you out tonight? Those type of songs. And Auntie Lois, she kind of got a kick out of hearing you guys sing those. So how would you describe your songwriting process?
I think the songwriting process kind of changes for me, because I originally started off like writing chords and then putting lyrics to it. And some people do it the other way, but I've always thought that the chords need to be written first, because it sets the tone versus the words. But at this point, I would definitely
chords. You say?
Yeah, I start off with chords because I think that the chords really set the mood for what the song needs to be about.
Okay.
Because I feel like if you go into a song sometimes with just lyrics, you're trying to force it to be something. And at least for me, words will always come for me, but like a certain musical feel for the chords is not as inherent.
Okay.
And I kind of think that's universal. A lot of people, some people really do write lyrics before they write the music, but I feel like that kind of leaves a little bit of the, sometimes the creativity part out, because you're trying to mold it into something rather than seeing where it goes. And I've written songs and I've started them, and then I've realized that, you know, two different parts of the songs are so different that they really could be two different songs. And then it turns into another song. But if I had lyrics that I wanted to specifically go to something, I feel like I would end up boxing in creativity instead of letting it become something else, even if it's unplanned, you know?
Right. Okay.
And then saving that idea for later if it's not, if it's not working out. Sometimes you want to write something about something, and then as you kind of get into it, you're like, no, this isn't about that.
You know? I see. Okay.
It's like you go into it with an intention, but then it's not what you're actually feeling. You know,
I see what you're saying.
When you start doing the chords and everything else, you start to feel like, no, this isn't going where I wanted it to go, but it's where it needs to go because you have the creativity to make it in that moment.
Gotcha. Okay. And I understand that because with my last book that I was writing, I was going to make it mainly devotions at first. And then I stopped. I had the whole book written out. And I said, no, I don't think this is where I wanted to go. So I had to take like a month and a half, almost 2 months, come back to it and realize I wanted majority of it poetry. And I needed to come up with more poems. And I didn't realize I had as many poems as I had already. You know what I'm saying? And I figured do devotions, but focus on poetry. You know? Theme is the same theme, surrender, but more of a focus on poetry, you know?
Right.
And I noticed with myself is that when I can't seem to get the words out any other way, poetry allows me to do that. You know what I mean? It allows my brain to go where it normally would not go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking different themes from different places and putting them all together.
Okay.
That makes sense. Like if you think about something like from slavery times, and then something I learned in a small group, and then something that I learned in therapy, and then some revelation that came to me from reading a book. But I could take all those different pieces and then something I appreciate from my grandmother and put it all in one poem. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas I might not necessarily be able to do that where just expressing it to someone.
Right.
So I understand what you mean about the songwriting process. And then you'll get in the middle of the poem and you're like, oh, all of a sudden it's taking a turn. As you say it, I wasn't expecting it to go that way. You know what I'm saying? But then that way feels good. And then you kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Develop that part. And then you go on down to the next part. So I'm feeling that, you know, that's a Holy Spirit moment. I'm definitely feeling that. So where would you say you get your inspiration for writing the lyrics?
I guess this kind of ties into what you said. I don't really have a separation of concepts in my head, so to say. So if I did read something in a book and I did go to therapy and I did think about somebody, I don't really see it as multiple places I'm pulling from, at least in present time. It's more so as soon as I've acquired that information, it's automatically kind of divided into the association that it actually is. So I kind of get like a full picture, kind of like almost instantaneously. As soon as I read information, it just instantly goes to whatever else is emulating that almost. So if I'm, thinking about, like, one of my songs, I ended up writing part of it when I was in psychology class, actually. I was taking notes on stuff with the brain, and they were talking about memory and about how things come back, like how you have light bulb memory, which is like a light bulb, quick thought flash. And thinking about that, when I was about to go in the studio that day too, I was thinking about how some of the memories that I was having about the stuff I was writing about was kind of popping up like that. So for me, it's like a lot of times information starts to give me example with what already is, not necessarily putting it into something new, but it just adds another layer to what already exists, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
So it's like I don't really connect the dots as much because for me, a lot of times they automatically are connecting themselves, so to say.
As you're writing.
Before I even get to the paper, but...
Oh, I see. That before you get to the paper, you're connecting it.
Yeah, and even when I'm writing, they're connecting, and I think that's really what creativity is being able to take your accumulative knowledge and let it have a free range rather than trying to be intentionally creative, if that makes sense, because...
Oh, it does.
Because, we just, as humans, we think in patterns and things like that, but what really makes the creativity is by not thinking so much on structure, but when you have an advanced level of knowledge and understanding, you can just start to weave things together that other people can't even initially see how they work together like that. It just comes naturally when you start, blending things, and people are like, oh, I didn't think about those being associated, or I didn't think about how that note could go to there. So it's like breaking free from that structure and finding those small little connecting points to take you into a completely different sound, writing style, whatever it is. But it's using a small connection point that's connected to something else, even completely different, but also similar, I feel like is what real creativity really starts to kind of take form.
Wow. So would you say a lot of your lyrics, would you think of them being from life experiences, or what would you say?
Well, when I was like 16, 17, I used to write a lot about people. Probably right after that first album I wrote, I started to write more about myself, which was kind of weird. So like I wrote a lot of songs about people because I was influenced by what was going on in my life and the people around me and how they were affecting me, and kind of going through the whole socialization experience of a teenager. But once I kind of started having an idea of who I was, I feel like that's when I started to realize that most of the substance was not necessarily what was around me, but how I interpreted it around me. And that perspective came from myself. And I think part of it also was the fact that in therapy, I kind of talked to her about my songs and stuff. And she was like, I noticed a lot of these songs are about other people. And like your feelings are kind of mixed in there, but you're more like a narrator. And it kind of made me realize that I wasn't necessarily writing from what I was going through fully. I was more so writing almost from a third person perspective about my involvement with somebody else.
Okay.
So I would say that started to become a lot more personal, and that was a hard thing to do, putting that on paper and then going out to sing it and being like, man, I hope this doesn't sound, crude and things like that. But once I kind of got over that and realized that that's part of the writing and the creativity and the brilliance is being bold in what you feel. And even if it might sound unpleasant to some, you have to be ready to accept that type of criticism or response, because if you're not going 100% with what you're feeling about something, you're kind of putting yourself in a censorship. You're censoring your mind to be comprehensible to other people.
Right.
But people don't want to hear something that's that easily comprehended. They want to hear something that makes them work, makes them think, shows them different things, different colors, different sounds, things they haven't thought of combining together. And that only comes from not being censored.
Ah, okay. Basically, and would you also be saying, like, in the sense that worrying about whether people are going to accept it or not, or be critical of it, or not understand that this is part of you and your lyrics? Are you speaking of it in those terms?
Yeah, and I'm speaking in that term as well, because a lot of times people, I feel like, are afraid of what they truly are or what they truly sound like. And even right now, going in the studio and making music is like an identity crisis, because I go out and I play a show, and I'm usually playing by myself, or I play with one other musician, but we're not a band, so it's just kind of like a random improv thing. And it might sound great, but then when I get in the studio, it's like, okay, I need to cut this studio album version of this song. And then you start to get this superficial idea in your head of like, okay, I need drums, I need bass, I need this, I need that. And it's like, okay, but what do you actually work with on a regular? And I feel like that's kind of, that can be a trail on its own, where some people sound really good live, but they don't sound good in the studio, or they sound really good in the studio, but they don't sound good live, because they are good with formatting to a certain sound, but they can't create that in a real time, real space. Whereas other people create it in a real space, but they can't make it in a superficial space. And that's still currently kind of a struggle for me. I haven't gone back to the studio because of it. It's just making sure that I am going to record what sounds like me, and not something that's too superficial, because my audience doesn't like a studio me, because they didn't hear me that way. They heard me raw, just me and a guitar most times. Mm-hmm. So trying to capture that raw feeling, I feel like, is kind of something I have to not be afraid of, which kind of ties into criticism of what you're doing. Exactly. And I can understand it too. Being an author and wondering, if you put something out there, will people like it? And will it be accepted when they think it's this or that? And then at the same time, having to go back and speak words of life to yourself and remind yourself that you had confirmation from the Lord to do this. So no matter what Sally, Sue, or Bobby says, this is what you had confirmation to do. You know what I mean? Right. God specifically told you to write this. And as you were writing it, you had confirmation along the way. And now that you finished, then you concerned about whether it's going to be accepted. And I think that's probably a lot of the struggle that artists have, is wondering about that, whether they are a performing artist as yourself, or, author, any type of, artist, whatever it is you're doing, you start wondering, you start second guessing your work, and when God gives us confirmation to do something, obviously he's going to make a way from that. You know what I mean? Because we've had those confirmations, those little bitty ones, and sometimes it's big ones. That's aha moment, like you're on the right path. You know what I mean? Where you get the affirmation from somebody else,
And then you get confirmation through the Lord. And sometimes he'll do it several times. Like when I finished this last book, and then I found a podcast on surrender, and there was something else on surrender, something else, 3 or 4 different things. As soon as I had finished, and I had to laugh and I could feel God's presence. And it's like, you're on the right track. Stop second guessing yourself and wonder who will and who will not like it.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is what you were called to do.
Right.
And it's you. And when you know that it's something that's you, when we're being our authentic self, we don't have to worry about whether it's going to be accepted, because we're already accepted by him. You understand what I'm saying? If no one else is doing the accepting, we've already been drafted in, so to speak.
I feel like that's, sometimes I'll hear people say like, oh, you're a true artist. And I feel like that's different than when people say, oh, they're an artist. And kind of when you're talking about acceptance in yourself, in reality, you should be yourself 24/7, 7 days a week. But I feel like a lot of times people get so caught up in what other people think that they censor themselves in and out, in and out, in and out. And then they kind of are like, wait, who am I? Who am I? What am I doing? Can I do this? Can I not do this? I feel this inside of myself, but I don't know if I should do it. But I feel like we create those type of struggles within ourselves by not just simply living by the way we know we are. We're trying to fit into these molds, whether it's for work or for school or for a job, whatever it is. You're trying to force yourself into a mold. And I realized it's like there's no point in doing that because it's exhausting, And
Yes.
The more I was out there in Florida and playing shows every night and meeting all these strangers and people talking to me and asking me what I was doing and where I was from and how old I was and all these questions, it was like, there's no point in me. I did talk to people and I was intentional, but the thing is, I never put on any type of facade, and to Tim that they got on the stage talking to them, whatever, off stage, same person. Like, I'm not going to try to flip it, for some type of appeal, because that's when you start to lose yourself.
Yes. I can definitely relate to that. Like you said, that's when you start to lose yourself. When you're trying to mold what you do based upon what you think people are going to want.
But I think that's also the other interesting thing is like talking about music and stuff. Being yourself is super important in music, but from a business standpoint, having an audience is like a relationship, and it's like you can't give your full self first go.
Right.
A lot of times people have to put out pop singles that are somewhat appealing. That first date where you guys go do something and it's not too emotional, too personal, but you get to know some stuff about each other. And that's the funny thing about music is like you do have to introduce people to different levels of what you're doing, because if you just went from one extreme to the other, it's so drastic. People oftentimes don't know how to appreciate drastic change like that. So people do have to release music in a certain order, certain timing, certain year around what's going on even in the world. So it's kind of funny because it's a very fine balance between being 100% all the time, but also knowing how much of yourself to put out there when and what quantity and what frequency, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. There's also a balance in that with having an audience as any type of artist, whether it's photography or, change, really.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, and we're going to be switching gears a little bit now. Think about how if you can give the audience an idea of how Blackness was celebrated in your family life.
I mean, in the house, we had a lot of pictures that were definitely pictures inspired or either painted of, Africans dancing or, Black mother, Black daughter. A lot of classic paintings done by the African-American artists or of African-American people all around the house. There's definitely, in the visual sense, there is art in the house that represented that. I think, I feel like there's kind of like a unspoken Black initiation where, you get, especially with hair, you get your tutorial and you get a pick or a comb or a brush and, somebody says, okay, use this first and use that first. And then you're like, oh, why? And it's like, because you have black hair. This is what you do. So it's like there's kind of an initiation in that sense. And I've always had hair for the most part, so that's always been kind of a constant reminder, along with just spending time in the city with the family, even though we were further away, and just having food and talking and going over for the holidays and just how we do our holidays and what we talk about and the things we joke about and, things like that. So I think most of that was through family and art. And, I would say mostly family and art.
Yeah.
Probably those two.
Yeah, I see what you're saying with family and art. And then thinking about like, oh my goodness, the food when we would spend time with family.
Mm-hmm.
The dressing and cornbread and sweet potatoes, right?
And deviled eggs and
yes,
all of that ham and the greens.
Mm-hmm. Yes, all of that. And then even as you mentioned, the discussions that we had, we as Black people can be very expressive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Very expressive. And we have certain ways that we express ourselves culturally that, I'm Black, but to me, it's funny, to me, just seeing how sometimes we can express ourselves or putting certain words together that maybe may not necessarily have been heard before us being together, but our way of, how would I say, I guess even putting creativity into language when I think about it,
Yeah, I would definitely, I look at it as, throughout history, there's been a lot of oppression. And I feel like around mealtime and food and things like that, and even language, Black people have constantly found a way to make sure that there is some type of cultural lineage that's more than just the circumstance. And whether that's, oxtail and chitlins, or even when you think about things like Creole French, it still marks on the history timeline for Black people as to how we're still making our own spin on it instead of just going with what history or the situation has forced us to do. And even Ebonics, and it's funny because, I say funny because a lot of other cultures now have looked at things the African-American community has brought to America and other places, and they like the dance, they like the talk, they like the slang, because it's something that they're not familiar with, but to us, it's, it's our way. So
right, it's part of who we are.
And I think it's it's our language of love to each other and, security and things like that to be ourselves, because we oftentimes do have to kind of put on an appropriation around people who aren't Black a lot of times, work environments and things like that.
Right. It's a lot that has to end up being suppressed.
Right.
Yeah, in order to fit into society, so to speak.
And even though your behavior might not be unruly, a lot of times, because people don't understand your own comfortability with your own expression, that they look at it as some form of being not polite or educated or something. And you might be an educated person, but all because you're proud about who you are and, you're expressing yourself in that way. Sometimes people look at that even as like, whoa, that's just how they behave. But really, it's the only way for us to behave is to hold our heads up high, and to be proud and Black and expressive, because if not, we'll just keep being, covered up.
Yeah.
Washed out.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And I know that I didn't send this to you, but how about if you could talk a little bit about some of the music you heard as a kid, whether it was in the car, as far as some of the Dusties, or even at Medea's house and some that Peace Do played. Do you feel like that those and some that even Mr. Love played, what type of impact did that have on you or who you are now?
I mean, I like a lot of Motown now and R&B, and I feel like there's so much music in my subconscious where I'll hear a song and I'll be like, oh, it's that song, but I don't even know the name of it. I don't know the artist. I don't even know the hook, but I know that I know the song. So it's funny because a lot of these songs have gotten pushed back so far back in my memory that I don't even know that I know them until I hear them. And then I'm like, oh, it's that song. I remember this one.
Okay.
But I think it definitely influenced me a lot, because when I think about my childhood and being in the car, I think about, dark yellow lights in the back seat and hearing some type of quiet, R&B song or, Anita Baker like stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And just falling asleep and waking up, at the house or whatever it is. So all very dreamlike, all of it, when it comes to my relationship with, that type of music, holidays and things like that. It's always kind of a mystic, kind of cinematic moment of shadow and light. Because most times I heard the stuff, it was at night. So it was a lot of shadow and light and this kind of soothing, low, melodic thing going on. So I feel like that's kind of my general association for even that type of music, even at night now, when I'm trying to wind down, that's what I'm listening to,
Mm-hmm. The R&B music.
Yeah, R&B, Motown, things like that.
Exactly. Now, can you tell the audience, give us a little bit of a peek into the world of being a homeschool student? And then along with that, thinking about, how people talk about like not having enough social interaction, along with giving us a peek, if you could talk about that, if it was a problem for you and why or why not. I know that was a lot, but yeah, basically your homeschooling journey and then your ideas around social interaction and homeschooling.
So just being homeschooled in general, like I have met people who are a little bit more closed off, and I've met people who are really sociable and you would never know. But the experience I had, I definitely would say was a lot of exposure, not just textbook material, but whether it was a family vacation where we were going somewhere and writing about the places we were going to, or if we were, going to a museum or whatever it was, and we were with a clipboard and notebook, and we had clipboards with us all the time because whether we were on the train or the bus or somewhere, or writing or jotting something down or practicing something. And I think now in my life, looking back, I think that definitely brought an awareness factor that is more instinctual now, to just be aware and to read and learn and understand what's going on, because I've had to do that in all sorts of environments. It's sometimes small things, even being around other people. They're like, "Oh, I need to do this." I'm like, "Oh, just do it in the car ride, do it on the bus, do it on the train." They're like, "Oh, I can't really focus like that," but I don't understand that, because that's what we did. Is we
That's
learned.
what we did. It was our life.
Right, we learned on the bus, on the train, and I feel like that type of thinking makes you more of a student of life itself, rather than just this is a moment where you're learning, rather than designating that as a moment of learning. Mm-hmm. You're just constantly open to it, and you just take in more information that way. I feel like being able to learn and observe and write and think really in any space, because life is short, but also there's so much happening at one moment that if you're not able to process it now, you're going to process it later. And at that point, you're like, "Oh, I could have done something, or I could have learned something, or I could have. And I've definitely noticed that homeschool's helped me in that sense. Also, just managing a schedule with the pandemic starting. I know a lot of people were calling me and texting me and telling me all about how they were suffering from, which is valid, suffering from depression and loneliness and all sorts of things, and not knowing to do with themselves or being bored. But being homeschooled and having to run your schedule and what time you're going to do things and how to get done by a certain time, filling up my day schedule is not a hard thing for me to do. I tell people all the time, I will never say I'm bored, because I never am. I'm either working, resting, or learning. So there's really no space for me to be saying that I'm bored, because I'm like, well, if you're bored, you probably want to be doing something that's not boring. And you can do something that's not boring by having the ability or the knowledge to do something that's fun. But that takes some form of education to do something more than what you're doing in the moment. So, I definitely feel like it's helped in that way. And a lot of people have brought that up to me, where I'll say I was homeschooled, and they're like, "No, you're not telling the truth. You're too socialized." But what people don't realize is it's like your socialization skills and exposure really comes with where you're going. I mean, there's people who live, Lake Villa, wherever it is, Gray's Lake. They've been to Chicago like 5 times in their whole entire life. Yet, we've spent literally, feels like sometimes, maybe just as much time in Chicago as we have, in the house. And
oh, my word. Those trips to Chicago, to museums, right?
I mean, you go in the morning, we get back late at night. So it's like
back late. Yeah.
We literally end up spending,
the whole day.
Sometimes 12 hours just in Chicago,
Yeah, I know.
Sometimes back to back, 2, 3 days in a row.
Right. Going to the library, studying, doing our schoolwork there. Like you said, we had the clipboards on the train, doing schoolwork on the train, schoolwork at the library, going to the museum, you guys, doing your assignments at the museums. Sometimes we would stop and get something for lunch. We would pack food and sometimes get a little treat to go along with that. And then during the time that you and Hannah were doing a little bit of talent agent work, while we were down there, we would go for a quick audition and then sometimes go to choir rehearsal right after that.
Right.
Get the training, you know what I'm saying, to make it to choir rehearsal or to a recital. All of that in one day.
And that's the thing, is like it'd be back to back, because sometimes they would have free days like in a row.
Right.
Where they would have like the aquarium this day, and then the next day would be the field museum, and the next day would be science and industry or whatever it was. So we'd be back and forth.
Right.
Days in a row. So just going out and being exposed to a bunch of different things that didn't necessarily have to do with where I was living made me a lot more aware of just the world as a whole, because I saw so much of where I didn't live that it gave me a better picture of other places as well. And just in general, just learning how to be observant of environments and spaces and people that live in those spaces. And, I've met a lot of people who've been in public school their whole life, whole way through college, and they still don't know how to talk to people. They still don't know how to socialize. And it's because they haven't been exposed to a numerous amount of situations that are unfamiliar to them. So they don't have necessarily a natural reaction or a natural train of thought, so to say, or a habitual type of assessment of the situation. If I even mean now, here where I'm at, if I drive somewhere and I go to a city, I can drive somewhere and be, okay, that's this type of area. This is the uptown. This is the blank. This area is a little bit more hood. Should be away from here. It's just like just having the ability to assess even a location and the people there just from being exposed enough it sounds simple, but it really helps in the sense of socializing and networking and, just being able to feel like you're not so lost, even when you're somewhere you've never been before. Last year I did a lot of traveling to places I'd never been before, and even this year. And, I didn't really necessarily feel scared to be there because I've been exposed to different environments I'm not familiar with. And, there's different systems and things like that. But, it's still having a general knowledge of how to talk to different people and how to be exposed to different things and understand and be accepting of it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So I know that you've studied quite a few languages. Can you let us know which ones and also along with the languages that you study, the effect that studying languages have on one's life in general?
Okay, well, I've studied Japanese now about 5 years.
Okay.
We did French and homeschool off and on for a numerous amount of years. I really don't know.
Right.
And the same with Spanish. I don't know as well. And I think I've been studying Italian now for about 3, maybe 2. Not terribly long for Italian, but
okay.
I'll say roughly about 2 years for Italian. And I've been dabbling in Russian, but just as language learning in general, language learning it's huge to your ability to speak and express because it starts to make you aware of what you're already trained to associate words with. Now, a lot of times I say people's problem with learning isn't the fact that they can't learn it. It's usually the way they're taught. And it's usually the word choice that's used while teaching. I say this in the example of when I learned how to drive stick. A lot of people said, you put the car in first gear, you give it some gas, you give it enough gas, and then you eventually let go of the clutch, right?
Right.
So that the car starts moving. Well, when you say to let go of something, you might as well say to drop it, right?
Right. That's what I'm thinking of. You say let go of the ball.
Right. You might as well say drop it. But, letting go of the clutch versus easing off of the clutch or putting something, easing off of it is completely different than letting go or dropping, right?
Right.
It does have somewhat the same results.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them is instantaneous, the other one is gradual. So
that's true.
Just learning how to be aware of word choice and things like that really starts to give you a picture of how inaccurately we speak. Not only that, but when you want to go to a different part of the world, you're able to learning that language and getting involved with it. Indirectly, you start to get involved with the culture because the way that people are speaking is kind of the way that they're thinking. And they're not directly correlated from some of the information I've been studying with linguistics and stuff, but it is correlated in the sense of how you're going to express yourself.
Okay.
You know, some languages don't even have definite, articles like we do.
Right.
Of always saying the, and even just using pronouns a lot, I, you. They don't find the need to do that so much because they can express that in the verb or other things. So it starts to kind of let you realize ways that you can express an idea more effectively, one that's more clear, helps you collect your thoughts better as to what's the goal. A lot of times we're speaking in patterns because that's the way we learn to speak, but it's not necessarily effective to explaining something. And I feel like that's oftentimes we don't realize is the English that we use to teach somebody else is not going to be the same English that we're using day to day while we're talking. And when you're using English that's like a lot of times people who learn English have better diction than people who were native speakers, because we learn how to take what we have and we make this kind of mishmash of words that no one's told us is wrong, even if it is wrong. No one's going to correct us. And we just use that day to day and we move on with our lives because it helps us get by. But when it comes to the sense of accuracy and trying to express ideas or feelings or emotions to another human being, there's a lot of miscommunication issues because of it, because we're using the wrong words, the wrong context, the wrong situation. And it's kind of crazy to think is that your level of communication or even your susceptibility to getting into an argument with somebody can really rely almost entirely just on your word choice, even though you might have an intention to convey a certain message. Because you didn't choose the words that really are associated with that message, it could be the complete opposite.
Exactly.
And, learning different languages definitely helped me realize about how other people even associate certain concepts as the same or different, even in Japanese, there's the concept of thinking to yourself and saying that you were thinking of something in a situation like talking to somebody.
Okay.
And it's just like, well, what's the purpose of that, right? We don't know what the purpose of that to us is. But when you start to learn it, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense, And it's because Japanese people don't like to be necessarily super, super definite. There's always kind of a little bit of, and that's part of like the mannerism, there's a little bit of that openness to, I was thinking, it's kind of, we probably should, not definite unless you're commanding somebody, because it's not part of the culture to be commanding, to people like that. So, stuff like that where you start to think about like, oh, wow, like how would it sound if I wasn't using commanding words all the time, or if I was being more definite or not definite, or how do I say something without sounding imposing? So I think it gives you a lot of different perspectives as to how to say what you actually want to say, which is funny, right?
Right. Yep, that can definitely get tricky. Like you said, another language, it can lead to an argument. It can lead to misunderstanding just from what seems like it would make sense to get your message across may not necessarily be what you need to say.
And I say this happens most commonly in English, just day to day.
Yes, even in English. Yep.
I mean, when you're a learner, there's a lot of forgiveness, but as an English speaker, nobody's going to really feel bad for you for saying the wrong thing.
Right. Or commanding or using commanding terms all the time. If you want somebody to do something, it's not going to go over well.
And that's how we speak, and that's what our culture goes with. But one thing is, like, we in English, we talk really loud. We put a lot of emphasis on words and vowels and things like that. Whereas, other languages don't use volume to express the meaning as much, right? Like if we're sad, we might talk kind of hey, like I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
Where as another language, you might not need to talk quieter. You just might need to use different words.
Right. To get the point across of how you're feeling.
But I feel like with that, there's a lot of nature to assume that we know what somebody else is talking about or feeling or whatever based on their volume or their tone or whatever it is. We go so much on like literally volume rather than like the actual words.
Mm-hmm. I would have to agree with that. So yeah, it can definitely get pretty tricky when it comes to language. Yeah, if we're not careful, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give a little bit of a summary of the mission trip that you went on? I know you did 3 years in a row to New Orleans with the church. You talk about a little bit of that and how that helped you in your life, and as far as like working as a team and that type of thing.
Well, those are good mission trips. I mean, we had visited the levees and the walls and areas that have flooded and areas that were rebuilt, and how they had solar panel stuff and all that other stuff. And I mean, there's a lot of cultures and different types of food, a lot of different things going on in New Orleans. But one thing I think was interesting was that there wasn't a large separation between the affluent and the not well off, you know.
Okay.
I mean, you would drive 2 blocks through mansions, 2-3 blocks, and then all of a sudden you'd be, you know, in a impoverished area. You know, we found, you know, it's incredible that the whole thing about that place with each other, so close to each other, but they somehow coexist. But in the actual aspect of the team stuff, I mean, it was my first time going on a ladder. We had painted houses, cleaned up people's yards, scraped off buildings like that had some of the paint that was coming off. There's prayer walks where the people would pray for people in the street. They just walk up to them, they just pray for them. Just playing with the kids, doing projects with them. And it wasn't necessarily like we were there to save New Orleans, you know what I mean? Like we weren't there for like disaster recovery. We were there for more the humanitarian aspect of a lot of kids in the area didn't have present dads or present moms or people to play with or older siblings or whatever it was. And it was just giving these kids somewhere to go to because the streets were in some of those areas kind of dangerous and a lot of people got sucked into gangs and stuff like that. So, you know, it was just spreading love and giving the kids somewhere to play and, you know, also learn about God and just telling them about how they all matter, you know, even though it might seem very small, but a lot of kids didn't think they mattered. They didn't think they would be anybody. So just having some adults or other teenagers tell these kids that gave those kids a lot of hope as to, you know, what is possible and what is love. And, you know, even some of the kids start calling some of the leaders dad and mom and stuff like that, you know, and in that aspect, it does get a little bit tricky because you start getting, you know, attached, but it's better to have a positive connotation than not.
Yeah. Wow. Sounds like a good time. And like you said, a lot of, it takes a lot of compassion and empathy to be able to do that type of work.
Definitely there was a lot of crying even from the people there, you know.
Really?
Kids are crying, you know, leaders are crying, teens are crying. So, you know, it was just overall just a very vulnerable time where there was just a lot of humiliation. And that's really the only way things like that can happen, you know, is having the intention to be open to what the area needs, not what you want to do for it, you know?
Yeah.
And people talked about even then how people had donated clothes during Katrina, and a lot of clothes dry rotted on the streets. Never made it.
I believe it.
Yeah, they never made it to the people. So those people did need clothes. They didn't get them, but what they also needed was, help, love, affection. All the other basic psychological human needs, even spiritual needs. So it was definitely a life-changing experience, and just working with the kids. And kids are funny. Kids are funny. And there's even adults, we helped out too. And I forgot about that. We went to the homeless shelter. Yeah, there was a homeless shelter that we went to, and we handed out food and drinks. And we talked with the people. Some of them were war veterans, didn't have legs. I gave my bandana to a guy because he told me he used to have American flag, and I had one on my guitar, so I gave it to him. He said he used to be in a band and all this other stuff. So, it's like people are telling you their life stories. And that's one thing about, when you go to New Orleans, is that everybody has a story. And if you sit with them, they'll tell it to you. You don't have to pry at people like you would, in the suburbs of a big city. People have a story and they'll tell it to you, as long as you're willing to listen and be understanding. And I heard a lot of interesting stories while, serving food and serving drinks and setting up beds and things like that. So it was definitely I could say it was a culture shock to some extent.
Wow. Wow. Can you tell us the effect you think that having mentors has had on you, and then along with that, why you think that the millennials, are afraid of being a mentee? Why do you think they're, afraid of having mentors? So the benefits that you find from having mentors in your life, and then why do the millennials, your age, why are they afraid of going in that direction?
I guess I should start from the afraid part, because I feel like that's kind of leading into the next part. But I feel like a lot of younger people are afraid of learning things from older people because they oftentimes associate what happened in the past with that generation. And part of that's true. But we also have to think about, like, even now, if somebody was to look back at our time and say, wow, this is crazy. I don't want to talk to anybody your age, because you guys were alive when this was happening and that was happening. And if I was alive, I wouldn't let that happen. But it's kind of one of those things where a lot of times I feel like younger people think that older people didn't do anything right, so to say, in their time.
Okay.
And I feel like they try to say, like, oh, I know everything. We're going to do things better because you don't understand better, because you haven't had better like this. And, I think it's a two-way street, really. I feel like older people shouldn't necessarily come to young people like they know everything. But I also think young people really don't have much experience as a whole because they're young.
Right.
So there's things that older people still need to learn from younger people, because during their time, it wasn't standardized as a way of thinking.
That's true.
So, not even just necessarily younger people learning, but can older people learn as well? Times have changed, but can they learn, and can younger people can they learn how to be teachers instead of, just simply saying that they're a lost cause? So I feel like, even though that is a question, I just kind of made another question. I feel like that's kind of the answer, which is what we're kind of seeing right now, is younger people do have an agenda for what we think is right. And older people also do. And just like any relationship, there does need to be some compromises, because there are some things that we're gaining by doing one thing and losing by another. But it's all about, at the end of the day, is it as much give as it is take? in a lot of situations? Is it too centered around one type of people's needs? And how that ties in for me with mentors is I've had a lot of older people come in my life, like Thais, Matt Chase, Reggie Rush. And just in general, I've never really had a problem talking to older people, people older than me. And that, when I say older people older than me. And a lot of other people do. I've never found a problem with it because at one point they were my age. Some people might be closer to my age and they can still mentor me in ways that I'm not educated in. But, even throughout a lot of philosophy and stuff I've studied and that I kind of apply to my life is that the teacher is only as good of a teacher as he is a student. And you're only as good at teaching as you are learning. And, when these people when I enter these people's lives, or I should say when we intersected in life, I taught them things, they taught me things. And it's not like everything that somebody teaches you necessarily is fact, but you can take out of that what you wish. And that's really up to you as to how much information you really want to think about, have food for thought, so to say. And I feel like just having people like that in your life is important because it saves you from going down a trend, right? Because, I hear older people talking about how it was a trend to sign up to serve in the war, right? But now this generation is like, oh, we don't want to, sign up to fight anything. A lot of people are like, nope. People make memes about it, about drafting and stuff like that.
Right.
But at one point, it was like a trend. Like, yeah, if you're an American, if you want to show some pride, you sign up, you fight. But it's like we're realizing that's not necessarily like something you need to do, right? Like it's something that's a personal choice. But all because your brother does it, your sister does it, doesn't mean you need to do it to show that you're, whatever it is you're trying to give off. So it's just certain things that I feel like, aren't. That changed, but you could say the same thing about, nowadays with trends and things. Like, I would say our generation has a lot less of an excuse at the end of the day when it comes to a lot of things, only because there's so many ways to get information now that if we want to believe something that's barely credible to anything, it's just because you want to believe it, not because you want to prove it to be right. It's just because you want to.
Right.
And I feel like that's a lot of what our generation's problem is that we just want to find a group of people who oftentimes identify with an idea, whether it's true or false, by using the internet rather than, just going with the facts, just going with the facts. And it's different, 30, 40 years ago, you didn't have this type of information to prove a lot of things, just basic things about rights or science or whatever it was. But we have so much evidence and science right before us, and, psychology and sociology, all these different type of studies that have come into the light to really show us how intricate people are in these social constructs that we make, that our generation really doesn't have an excuse to do some of the things that we do because we have the knowledge to do better. And I feel like, if anything, it's our responsibility to use that knowledge for the better and to educate those who didn't have that opportunity. But if we're constantly using that information to, discredit older people because they don't come from a time in technology rather than, spend the time to educate, I feel like that just creates a bigger rift. Creates more turmoil. Like you can't grow flowers in oil. You know, you gotta take the sludge. You gotta dispose of it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Let the soil heal. Plant something in there. Give it nourishment. It's hard. That's the thing. At the end of the day, it's hard to change people's minds and the ways that they've been raised to think.
Right.
And especially with the world as it's changing now, we've seen something that has never happened before. And what's happening right now is science fiction. You know, you go on the Twilight Zone and they're using a weird, funny looking box and they're, you know, video calling somebody like we are right now, you know, and, you know, it's the future. It's the future. Right. You know, they get out there and they're Johnson, you know, where are you at? I'm on Mars, you know, you know, it's something crazy like that, but that's literally happening, right? We have these little boxes.
Right.
We can go to a different planet and say, hey, here's what it looks like on the surface of Mars with this little robot, or here's what it looks like on the moon, you know, with this video camera. So we literally, in a short amount of time, have become sci-fi, you know, and I feel like because of this almost unnatural acceleration, and I mean, some people, you know, people say it's science that we evolve, but in the sense of how things have been progressing, technology has really made us progress so fast that the gap between, you know, 60 years ago and now is huge. You know, it's just huge. Like it's It's almost like people need to go back to school to learn what the new world is about, almost, because you know, not everybody's still trying to look to learn. You know, some people are still thinking that the world works a certain way.
Right.
You know, and it's crazy. You know, it's crazy that we do have all this technology, yet there's so much. There's this thing to hold on to the past, and it's a good thing to hold on to the past to learn from, so you don't make the same mistakes. But the past is a past for the reason, you know, and of course that is how time works. But I definitely think that people need to think more about the future as to what's actually happening versus what we think, you know, is happening through some old way of thinking.
Yeah. Just saying. Now I got one that's going to make you think a little bit. What does brokenness mean to you?
I think brokenness is it's like an error 404 on a computer. Just you don't know where it comes from. It's just not working. It's a blue screen. You know, it's a blue screen, page not found, whatever it is. It's kind of I feel like brokenness, or really, when you say brokenness, I'm assuming you're talking about anything involving like traumas, anxieties, depression. I'm assuming you're talking about things of that nature.
Yes, anything, whatever it means to you. Yes.
I feel like, you know, brokenness is kind of like it's areas where the railroad track ends in our minds, and emotionally and mentally, where we should be able to process better or how to move on. But because we haven't gotten the parts to repair that part of our track to connect one thing to the next, it just keeps falling down in this pit where it just keeps stacking up. And eventually it manifests in some type of psychological, emotional disorder or outburst on the others. But I think it's something that we all have in different ways, and it's not like any of us are necessarily ridden of it. But I think really the hardest part is learning to beat the tracks, right? Because really what we have to do is, instead of putting brand new tracks there, putting a brand new connecting spot, right, of material, we ourselves have to become that track and let that thing roll over us. It's going to hurt, you know, to like roll it over you. And I feel like once you've bridged that gap with your body enough times, you eventually understand the size of the gap, how hard is the material, how much of the material you need. And once you've let it roll over you enough times and you're strong enough where it doesn't bother you anymore, you can, take the right tools and coping skills or whatever it is to put a more permanent fix there, or at least something that lasts longer than you having to use so much energy to ride out that thing rolling over you like a train,
Right.
Instead of being part of the tracks, you can have something else serve as the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't be so hard. It won't be such a distraction or a toll to have a train roll over you type of thing.
Right. Wow. What do you think happens as a result of years of unhealed brokenness? Like just in a state for so long and not even touching it to do anything about it.
I feel like years of not dealt with brokenness, whether that's trauma, anxiety, or depression, whatever it is, it's kind of like it's a censorship. And I do say censorship because it's censoring out reality a lot of times, and it's going with what that disease, what the brokenness feeds off of. So if you're dealing with depression, for a very long time, your world is going to start to be influenced by only depressing things, right? It's going to start to look like the way you're thinking. And whether that's that or it's trauma, you're going to start to realize you're living in a bubble of a small bit of things. And those small bit of things is probably just the brokenness itself, because they can be small, then they become big. But it's like the sky's covered up and you don't know what time of day it is, inside of your brain. You can't see that it's raining. You can't see that it's sunny. You can't see that it's snowing, because at this point, your whole world is based around, it's filtered through the brokenness. It's not, it doesn't get straight to the core of your thinking or your heart. It goes through the brokenness first to pull out all the things that's reality, and leaves whatever goes in place with whatever the brokenness you're struggling with is. So even though there might be all these positives, the brokenness filters out the positives, and whatever the negatives are is, of course, what's going to make it through. And you go, oh, yeah, that is reality. But really, your brain has filtered out all the other things that are obviously good, obviously progressive, obviously could help you. And I feel like a lot of times people don't understand how it's not. Some people go like, oh, well, that works for you, and that works for those type of people, and God just really loves you type of thing. And I'm like, it's not like you're so chosen to be damned. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like someone's, it's not like that person was inherently more blessed than you.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, were they able to realize their blessings maybe more than you could, and actually take advantage of that?
Okay.
And move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I see what you're saying. Now, I sent you 5 poems to read, and I know that we're going over time, and you've got things you got to get done. And what I'm thinking that I'm going to do is have you to read 2. If you could read The Art of Anger for the first one, and then for the second one, if you can read the poem entitled Home.
Okay.
And after reading those 2, I have one last question to ask you.
Okay. Let me pull that up really quickly.
Sure.
Okay. The Art of Anger and which one? Home?
Home, yes.
Okay. So this is The Art of Anger. Angered, measured by unfairness, injustice, inequality, wrong. Seen as red when it becomes rage, what do we do? Do with it? If manifested in the wrong way, then we are the thugs, rebels, inhumane. If manifested in the right way, we are controlled, we are contained, like medicine. In a pill bottle, we are civilized. Whatever way it's viewed, when it comes to anger, we feel compelled to negotiate it. Tell it to be cool, stay there, right where it is. For like a mighty hurricane, it can release the power of the undesirable, or like the waves hitting the seashore on a windy day. It can be tamed, subdued, unleashed, and brought back in, like showing the hurt that one feels after being betrayed by a spouse or close-knit friend.
Thank you. And then for the second one, the poem by the name of Home. And just to let the listeners know, both of these poems are poems that I wrote in my new book that I just released entitled Surrender, that you can find on Amazon. Okay, so this is the poem Home.
The dwelling place, the residence, the cozy, restful haven that one looks forward to after a day's hard work. Home, consisting of a kitchen where family gathers to eat, commune, live life with each other, rehearse the traditions that they will remember. When everything else changes and their children become adults and the meals that are baked or cooked in love comes to the forefront of our minds. Home, where the welcome mat screams, "Stay away, I'm so glad to see you, my friend." Stay a while, sorry. Stay a while, I'm so glad to see you, my friend, to have your feet rest upon my surface and find relief in the layered fibers of my existence. Home, where the body has the courage to retire at the day's end. After watching a sunset, playing a board game, binging favorite shows that brings up the emotions, the one forgets. You know those ones that are hidden within home, where the bedroom houses the bed that will feel like a glimpse of heaven, where the body leans into the tiredness and monotony and rhythms of the day, and dare to end in prayer. Before having it our way, always has been, will be home.
Wow. And on that note, I have my last question.
Okay.
I want you to think about, what does home mean to you?
That was a difficult one for me at first because I was traveling and I knew I didn't want to be in Illinois, but I also felt like I was kind of in this kind of fantasy land when I was in Florida, as much as I loved Florida. And I was just kind of trying to figure out, what does home mean, for a while. And I thought it was where my friends were. I thought it was, where my parents lived. And I started to realize is home is with me. And it's not necessarily a geographic location. The geography does make a difference in day-to-day living as to how comfortable it makes you feel, or the nature and things like that. But when it comes to the feeling of actually feeling at home, it's definitely what you're building for yourself somewhere. And on top of that, it can be the people that you meet. Like I used to think home was one location, but I've realized it's a multitude of locations. I have a lot of different homes. And when you realize that you have more than one home, it starts to make you realize that the world is not as big as it may seem. And that as broad as it is and dark, there's lights. Just like when you look up or see satellites looking down the earth, you see all these little dots. And that's kind of like home. You got all these little dots lit up in the darkness. And there's somewhere to retire to. There's somewhere to say, if I ever need to, I can go there. And being able to say, if I ever need to, I can go there, gives you security that you can go somewhere just to begin with. Because there's somewhere nearby that you can call home for a minute, a day, a couple nights, whatever. And I feel like that's really what home means.
Wow.
One of my favorite songs by a Japanese band called Super Beaver is called Home. And they talk about the nostalgia of what home is. And I think that's interesting with that question. That's one of my favorite songs. So
that is interesting that that's one of your favorite songs. And that's a question that I have here. And that's also the name of a poem that I wrote and surrendered for home, you know. Home means so many different things to me, you know. I see home as where I am abiding in Jesus. I see home as thinking of Memphis, Tennessee as a kid, going to Memphis and being at a relative's house. And my heart and my soul says, this is home. When I hear the crickets outside, it reminds me of going to Memphis as a kid and hearing the crickets at night. And it says, this is home. You see what I'm saying? When I hear the Dusties being played, like whether I play them in the car or I come home and I play them, you got Earth, Wind, and Fire. You might have Luther, you have LTD, Switch, you have all those different groups that I heard as a kid. That makes me think of home. When I think about hanging out barefoot in Memphis, walking with all of the cousins, hanging out in, when my dear lived in public housing, hanging out with friends, that's home. Soul food, home. And even as we talked about earlier, was celebrating Blackness and hearing each other express ourselves. To me, that's a feeling of home. Yeah, so it's so many. I've realized as I've gotten older that there's so many different things, and just so much that's wrapped up into the word home for me. You know, but like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific location. You know, it can be certain locations, but it does not have to be.
Right.
Well, Timothy, I want to thank you so much. And like I said, it's so sweet to see your face after not having seen your face since August.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I didn't think about that.
Yes, I have not seen your face in person since August. And you be safe out there going to pick up your visitors and whatnot, okay?
All right, thank you.
All right, and thanks for coming on the show. I love you.
Love you too.
Okay. All righty. Bye-bye.
I want to thank you for listening to the Healing Our Brokenness podcast, an interview with Timothy Horton. And I want to thank Timothy Horton for bringing our intro and outro music every week. The song is Valley of Grace, and you can go out and listen to it on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. And it's also out on Amazon. Until next time.